How do you feel about violence in movies? Love it? Hate it? Either way, it's everywhere. From action-packed blockbusters to grim introspective dramas, Hollywood has built an empire in violence. Sometimes it can be thrilling, sometimes it's disturbing, and sometimes, when done right, it sticks with you long after the credits roll. And Drive is one of those films. Directed by Nicholas Winding Refn and released in 2011, Drive became far more influential than anyone could have anticipated. From its memes...
I was wondering, what's the recommended amount of dedicated RAM I should have to a server?
to arguably birthing the literally me trend. Drive cemented itself as a cultural landmark. It also helped popularize the 80s inspired synthwave genre, which features predominantly throughout the film. But what stands out most to me is its portrayal of violence. Unlike many other films where violence feels almost routine, Drive treats it as something deliberate and meaningful. Ultimately, Drive is a story of contrasts: quiet and chaos, protection and destruction, beauty and brutality. It's a meditation on what it means to be violent and the heavy costs that come with it. This is our protagonist, the driver. We never learn his name. He's literally listed as driver in the credits, and we know nothing of his past. He's essentially the proverbial man with no name you'd see in a western. He's a lone figure defined more by his actions rather than his words. In the opening scene, we see him as the very definition of calm precision. His criminal professionalism is summed up perfectly in how he lays out his conditions to an employer.
You give me a time and a place, I give you a 5-minute window.
And he means it. From the moment the job starts, it's clear that he knows exactly what he's doing. While the robbers are inside, he's in the car monitoring the police radio and staying one step ahead of the law. At first, the basketball game on the radio seems more like frivolous background noise, but it's later revealed to be part of his plan. A timing device he uses to perfectly sync his escape with the crowd exiting the stadium. Even as the tension builds and the police closes in, the driver remains composed, blending into the crowd. With this, he proves his consummate skill as a getaway driver. If you think about it, he's basically a criminal Uber driver. But what makes this scene so compelling isn't just his skill, it's his detachment. There's no panic, no rush. While others might crack under the pressure, the driver remains seemingly unfazed, giving the impression that this is routine for him. Yet beneath this calm exterior lies something far more volatile. As the film progresses, events strip away at his calm, methodical exterior to reveal a side of him that is much darker. Someone capable of intense, raw, and explosive violence. It's as if this violent side of him is always simmering beneath the surface, barely contained. When the pressure becomes too much, that control shatters and what emerges is something terrifying. The driver's isolation is immediately apparent when we first see his apartment after he makes his getaway from the introductory scene. It's small, stark, and impersonal, with no signs of a life. No photographs, no mementos, no hints of a past or any of his interests. It's as if his existence revolves entirely around his work, whether it's as a stunt driver, a mechanic, or a criminal Uber driver. This isolation extends to his interactions with others. He rarely speaks even when prompted and avoids any meaningful relationships. Even in his longest-standing relationship, that's with his boss Shannon, there's a sense of detachment from the driver. Despite working together for over 5 years, initially there's little indication that the driver feels any deep personal connection to Shannon. But as events unfold, Irene and Benicio slowly enter his life, and for the first time we see how he leaves his solitude. It starts small, helping Irene with her car and giving her and Benicio a ride back home. But these moments reveal a softer, more vulnerable side to the driver. He connects with Benicio in playful ways, such as having a staring contest or randomly offering him a toothpick to play with for some reason. Meanwhile, his relationship with Irene is marked by mutual attraction, communicated through smiles, stares, and sparse dialogue. Nothing exemplifies his growing relationship with them more than the real human being scene. It's one of the few moments in the film where we see the driver genuinely laugh. It's the most human we ever see him, a rare glimpse of the life that he could have if he allowed himself to connect with others. I will admit, however, that the scene is very cheesy, especially when factoring in the song. In fact, under a cynical viewing, it can come across as smarmy and melodramatic. But I feel this may have been a deliberate choice to hint at just how fantastical, dreamlike, and ultimately unattainable this connection is for the driver. By the end of the film, this thought is tragically proven right. The driver's inability to maintain connections is part of what makes him so tragic. On one hand, his isolation protects him. It allows him to operate without vulnerability, without distractions. But on the other hand, it ensures that he can never escape the self-imposed solitude that defines him. This contrast is central to his character and to the film's exploration of violence and its costs. From early in the film, violence is hinted at through small moments and implied threats. These little moments are sprinkled throughout the narrative, creating a slow, creeping sense of escalation. The first overt display of violence comes in the diner scene, where the driver coincidentally bumps into a past client. The client recognizes him and starts recounting what's happened to him and his brother since they last worked together. But before he can finish suggesting they go for another job, the driver shuts him down with a chilling threat.
Shut your mouth, or I'll kick your teeth down your throat and I'll shut it for you.
We never see the client's reaction, but the intense stare from the driver is enough to know they must feel threatened. That stare says everything. It's a silent confirmation that the driver not only means what he says, but is fully capable of carrying it out. The true power of the scene lies in the driver's delivery. His words are calculated, spoken with the utter calmness that only makes the threat more menacing. He doesn't raise his voice or resort to physical intimidation. His stare alone communicates the violence simmering beneath the surface. Later on, Irene's husband and Benicio's father, Standard, comes back from prison. After Standard is beaten by thugs demanding he completes a heist for them, the driver notices Benicio playing with something.
Want me to keep that for you?
Okay.
This scene is understated, but it reveals so much about the driver's character. He remains calm for Benicio's sake, masking the fury brewing inside of him. The moment he fidgets with the bullet, you can feel the weight of his decision. He's already committed to stepping into the violence himself, if it means protecting Irene and Benicio from harm. The bullet itself is a symbol of the danger that now surrounds Irene and Benicio. These scenes hint at the tenuous balance that the driver maintains, using calm restraint to avoid unnecessary conflict. For now. The pawn shop heist is where everything begins to unravel. The driver agrees to help Standard pull off the heist and meets with the head thug Cook to lay out his usual conditions. Unlike the opening heist, where the driver operates with detached professionalism, his decision here is deeply personal. It's clear that the driver's choice isn't motivated by loyalty to Standard, but by his protective instincts towards Irene and Benicio. The robbery initially proceeds as planned. Standard and Blanche, a woman recruited by the thugs, enter the pawn shop while the driver waits outside in his car. Another car pulls into the car park, raising the driver's suspicion, though he stays focused on his role. Blanche emerges from the shop first, carrying a bag of money, but as the seconds stretch on, with no sign of Standard, the tension mounts. Finally, Standard exits the shop, only to be abruptly gunned down by the shopkeeper. What follows is a tense and visceral car chase. Luckily, the driver's skills behind the wheel are as sharp as ever. He manages to outmaneuver the pursuing car, forcing it to crash and narrowly escaping with their lives. It's very interesting how this scene contrasts with the heist at the start of the film. The first thing that stands out is the utter lack of music. All you hear are the gunshots, roaring engines, and Blanche's screams. This absence of a musical score immerses the audience in the chaos, making you feel like you're in the car with the driver, and also serves to add a layer of tense realism. By comparison, the opening heist is underscored by a tense backtrack, which heightens the suspense but also adds a layer of detachment. The second key difference lies in the execution. The opening heist is a masterclass in control, with the driver commanding every aspect of the operation. In the pawnshop heist, control is ripped away from him. The betrayal, the unexpected arrival of the other car, and the sudden violence inflicted on Standard throws the driver off balance. The sheer abruptness of Standard's death is shocking, not just for its brutality, but for what it signifies. It highlights the vulnerability the driver's newfound connections have created. Standard's death is a grim reminder of the danger now threatening Irene and Benicio. But perhaps more importantly, the driver doesn't commit the first brutal act of violence. It's inflicted on Standard. This distinction is significant because it means that the cycle of violence is initiated by others and not the driver. But this moment does mark the point where he begins to abandon restraint and becomes an active participant in the escalating brutality, as we'll see in the next scene. After the chaotic events of the pawnshop heist, the driver and Blanche retreat to a motel. While there, Blanche makes a phone call, presumably to Cook. Meanwhile, the driver calls Irene, but Benicio answers and tells him that Irene is being questioned by the police. Later on, the driver sees on the news that Standard has been framed as having acted alone in a robbery. This revelation immediately raises the driver's suspicions. Why would the pawnshop owner name only Standard, knowing that there were other accomplices? The pieces begin to fall into place, and the driver turns his attention to Blanche. As he prepares to interrogate her, he dons his gloves, a small but telling ritual. Typically, the gloves represents the driver's professionalism, a way for him to keep his hands clean while performing his work. But here, they take on a darker significance. They feel less like a barrier and more like a transformation. A signal that the driver is ready to embrace his violent nature, a side of himself he's tried to suppress but can no longer deny. He interrogates Blanche to find out what she knows about the heist.
Every word out of your mouth is the truth, or I'm gonna hurt you.
She reveals that the whole thing was a setup from the start and that the second car was supposed to ambush them after they robbed the pawn shop. Blanche insists she didn't know about the abundance of cash or that anyone would get killed. The driver then demands that she takes him to Cook. After the interrogation, Blanche goes to the bathroom to clean herself, and the driver notices a new message on her phone. What ensues is a truly graphic scene where two thugs invade the motel room. Blanche is blown away, while the driver manages to kill both assailants. The aftermath is gruesome. Blood splatters the room. The driver, drenched in blood and wild-eyed, stands in silence. His calm facade has been shattered, revealing the sheer viciousness within himself. Much like the pawnshop heist, this scene avoids glorifying violence. There's no rousing music to stylize the action, only a droning and the sounds of the violence itself. This unvarnished portrayal pulls the audience into the scene, forcing them to confront the grim reality. It's a stark departure from the way many films romanticize or sanitize violence, and this quality is repeated for almost all of the violent scenes in the rest of the film. Additionally, it's also the first time we see the driver fully embrace his capacity for violence. This isn't the calm professional man we saw in the opening heist. It's someone fighting for survival, consumed by rage and desperation. Despite the primal nature of the attack, The fact that the driver carries it out with such competence, and the fact that he takes a moment to collect himself beforehand, suggests that this level of violence isn't new to him. It's a concerning implication that the driver has committed similar acts before, hinting at a darker, hidden past. Violence is something that feels disturbingly natural to him, and as the driver descends deeper into this chaos, the line between protection and destruction blurs. His actions, though born out of care, ensures that he will remain trapped in a cycle of bloodshed. A cycle that threatens to consume not just him, but the very people he's fighting to protect. Following the chaos at the motel, the driver tracks down Cook. Wielding a hammer, he smashes Cook's hand and throws him to the ground. In an act of irony, the bullet, a symbol of the threat against Irene and Benicio, becomes a tool of retribution as the driver uses it to exert dominance over Cook. The environment around them heightens the unsettling nature of this scene. The brightly lit dressing room, filled with witnesses, clashes with the dark violence unfolding within it. The dancers, while visibly tense, are all quiet and inactive. Their impassivity amplifies the scene's eerie tone and suggests that violence is so commonplace in their world that they've become desensitized to it. This small detail highlights a recurring theme in the film: the normalization of criminality and violence, and its acceptance as a routine part of life for some people. And then there's the driver's conversation with Nino, which adds another layer of tension. The driver attempts to arrange a meetup with Nino where he can give him the money from the pawn shop heist. Visually, the driver's physical state betrays his inner turmoil.
I want to give you a time and a place and you're going to come and get it.
While his voice remains steady, his profuse sweating and trembling reveals the stress he feels in the moment. Unlike earlier moments where the driver's actions was a response to external threats, here he is proactive. And he'll pay the price, as we'll see in the next violent scene. The next scene begins with Irene, visibly devastated by Standard's death. The driver visits her, asking if they can talk. Irene, struggling to process everything that's happened, says she can't talk and needs to leave for work. The driver offers to walk with her, and in this brief exchange, he finally confesses the truth about the heist. He offers the money to Irene, urging her to take Benicio and leave town for their own safety. He even tentatively suggests that he could come with them. It's interesting that the driver is still hanging on to the hope of having a life with Irene and Benicio despite everything that has happened. Both of them are visibly upset, tears welling up in their eyes as the weight of the moment sinks in. For the driver, it's the weight of rejection. And for Irene, it's the weight of the reality behind Standard's death. This scene is also noteworthy as it marks the only instance in the film where a woman engages in violence.
You could take Benicio.
The slap is striking not just because of its spontaneity, but also because it appears so out of character for the gentle Irene. Yet, viewed within the broader context of the film, which can be interpreted as a narrative about escalating male violence, Irene's action gains additional significance. Throughout the film, men are consistently portrayed as perpetrators or at least complicit participants in violence, while women are generally depicted as either passive bystanders or direct victims, such as Blanche, who is violently killed, or Irene herself, who suffers the loss of Standard. Against this backdrop, Irene's slap is relatively minor compared to the film's broader violence, yet it carries substantial emotional weight. Much like violence serves as an emotional outlet for the driver, Irene's slap expresses the intense emotions she's experiencing in this moment. Betrayal by both Standard and the driver, anger over being kept unaware of Standard's dangerous circumstances, and hurt from the driver's insensitive suggestion to use the money, which indirectly led to Standard's death. Additionally, the actions of Standard and the driver have placed Irene and more importantly Benicio in potential danger. In this context, the slap can be seen as a natural, maternal expression of anger at having put Benicio at risk. Another interpretation suggests that Irene's slap arises from her realization that the driver embodies a darker persona than the gentle man she had come to trust. In this light, The slap symbolizes Irene's instinctive rejection of this unfamiliar and disturbing aspect of his character. Ironically, she communicates her rejection through an act of violence, precisely the trait that most defines the driver's inner darkness. It is as though the driver's inner darkness is spilling into Irene. This moment poignantly represents the point at which innocence is irrevocably lost in their relationship. Their conversation is cut short when one of Nino's men arrives. They step into the elevator together, and it doesn't take long for the driver to sense the danger. He moves Irene into a corner and kisses her. In this moment, this long, tender kiss acts as a direct confession of love for both the driver and Irene, a validation of the feelings they've had for each other. Bittersweet mood music begins to play as the spotlight is quite literally shone on them. The tension that's been building between them throughout the film is finally released in this one magical, fleeting moment. Then in a sudden burst of violence, he attacks the goon, slamming him to the floor and crushing his head in a blind rage. The aftermath is haunting. The driver, drenched in sweat and blood, turns to Irene. The contrast between the man who kissed her just moments ago and the man she sees now could not be starker. The fear in her eyes is unmistakable, but so is the fear in his. The driver is terrified, not of her, but of himself and the monstrous side of him that he has just revealed to her. The elevator doors close, separating them, perhaps forever. This scene is the emotional crux of the film. In the span of a few seconds, he transitions from emotional vulnerability to savage brutality. The kiss feels like a goodbye, a short-lived moment of intimacy that is immediately overshadowed by the horrific violence that follows. The elevator itself becomes a metaphor for their relationship. They share one brief, beautiful moment together, before the doors close, symbolizing their separation. The driver's violent nature, which he cannot escape, has created an unbridgeable chasm between them. This all contributes to a scene that shows us the full range of the driver's character. Here, he's fully exposed, full of love, fear, rage, and sorrow. And this is the moment where his hopes for a future with Irene and Benicio are irreparably shattered. It's beautifully shot, emotionally raw, and one of the most memorable moments in Drive. So far, we've explored violence as it pertains to the driver. However, I'd argue that there's one other character in Drive who is just as essential to the film's theme of violence: Bernie Rose. A man whose approach to violence is colder and more pragmatic. The driver fights out of desperation, while Bernie kills because it's necessary. Now, I'll be upfront with you. I think Bernie is the best character in the film. At the very least, he's certainly the most complex. When we're first introduced to him, we get the sense that he's someone of standing, maybe even someone criminal, but it's not overtly presented. This is best seen in his first interaction with Shannon, when Shannon pitches the idea of investing in a stock car for the driver. Bernie scoffs, but he doesn't act like a stereotypical mobster. There's no grandiose posturing, no overt menace. In fact, there's a strange degree of familiarity between him and Shannon, suggesting that they've known each other for a long time. The first significant scene with Bernie is when he meets the driver for the first time. Shannon introduces them after the driver completes a lap on the racetrack. Bernie, ever the businessman, extends his hand and says,
"Nice to meet you."
My hands are a little dirty.
So am I.
It's a fascinating exchange. In just a few words, Bernie offers a tacit admission that he's dirty, not just in the literal sense, but in the moral sense. It's an unspoken acknowledgement of his own history of criminality. The most interesting detail, though, is that while the driver eventually accepts Bernie's handshake, Shannon, who's been working with Bernie for years, is denied the same courtesy. Shannon reaches out, but Bernie just stands there. This small moment says a lot. This is not a handshake of formality, but of acknowledgement. Bernie seems to recognize something in the driver, something perhaps dangerous or familiar, even if he's not fully conscious of it yet. There's an unspoken understanding between them. Shannon, on the other hand, is just another businessman trying to make deals, and in that moment we get the first glimpse of a deeper connection between the driver and Bernie, a connection that will only become clear as the film progresses. A little while later, Bernie and Nino visit Shannon's auto shop to check on the race car they've invested in. Nino is furious about the price and complains to Bernie that Shannon is overcharging them, but Bernie, ever calm, simply says,
This is just a shell. It's the inside that counts, not the outside.
At first glance, it's a simple remark about the car, but when you consider the film's themes, it becomes much more significant. The idea of appearance versus reality is a recurring motif in Drive. The driver at first appears to be quiet, passive, even gentle, but inside he harbors a violent primal rage. Bernie, on the other hand, presents himself as a businessman, someone reasonable and composed, but much like the driver, hides something far more ruthless beneath that exterior. This same idea is mirrored in a later conversation between the driver and Benicio while they're watching a cartoon. The driver asks Benicio if one of the characters on TV is a bad guy, and Benicio says yes. When the driver asks how he can tell, Benicio simply replies it's because he's a shark. The driver presses him, asking if there are no good sharks, but Benicio insists that there aren't. It's a seemingly simple exchange, but it speaks volumes. Bernie's words,
It's the inside that counts,
are proven true. We judge people by appearances, but appearances can be deceiving. Both Bernie and the driver don't look like sharks, but they certainly act like they are when the situation arises. Going back to the auto shop scene, Bernie approaches the driver as he's working on the car. At first, he tries to make conversation, asking if the driver is ready for the upcoming race. The driver, distant as always, simply replies,
I hope so.
Bernie laughs off the driver's response before sharing how he met Shannon. Back in the 80s, he produced movies and Shannon was the guy who supplied the cars and handled the stunts. He says he liked Shannon even though he always overcharged him. But when Shannon got involved with Nino's friends, things went bad. They didn't take kindly to the overcharging and broke his pelvis. Bernie explains that he's telling the driver all this because Shannon's got a lot invested in him. And so does he. The subtext is clear. Bernie is reminding the driver of the consequences of crossing him. What makes this moment so unnerving is how natural it is for Bernie to slip between friendly conversation and veiled threats. It's as if violence is woven into the very fabric of his being. It's not a performance or an act, it's just a fundamental part of who he is. And for the first time, the driver feels it. He senses that there's something more to Bernie, something far more dangerous. And this danger is proven in the pizzeria scene. But first, we need to establish some context. After the brutal events of the motel scene, the driver is left wounded and is being patched up by a doctor, presumably hired by Shannon. This scene establishes a crucial plot point. Shannon reaches out to Bernie to learn more about what went down at the pawn shop heist. While it's initially framed as Shannon just gathering information, it ultimately ensures the further escalation of the situation. Later on, after the harrowing elevator scene, the driver confronts Shannon, demanding to know why Nino sent a hitman to his apartment. Shannon, visibly rattled, lets slip that he told Bernie about the driver's involvement in the heist. The driver is understandably furious, not just because of the revelation that he's been put in danger, but because it's exposed Irene and Benicio to the crosshairs of men like Bernie and Nino. However, despite his anger, the driver still shows genuine concern for Shannon's well-being, telling him he needs to leave town immediately. This moment is significant. It marks a contrast from the driver's earlier emotional distance from Shannon. It's as if the driver wasn't just suppressing his violent instincts, but also his emotions in general earlier in the film. The takeaway of all this is that Bernie now knows everyone's involvement. Immediately after the driver's confrontation with Shannon, we cut to Bernie and Nino at Nino's pizzeria. The tension is palpable. For the first time, we see a genuine division between them. Up until this point, Bernie and Nino have seemed like partners operating within the same criminal world, but this scene makes it clear that they have very different ways of handling problems. Here it's revealed that Bernie had already advised Nino to take the money when the driver offered, suggesting that he's the level-headed one in their partnership. Nino snaps back that it isn't that simple. Cook unhelpfully interjects, saying that he can take care of the driver for them before Bernie disdainfully shuts him down. He makes it very clear how much he despises Cook. Nino then explains that the money actually belongs to a Philadelphian mobster who stashed it in the pawn shop as seed money for a rival operation. Bernie is furious that Nino didn't come to him first before going ahead with the heist. He lays it out plainly that if anyone finds out they stole the money from the East Coast mob, they're both dead. Nino's answer exposes why he went ahead anyway. He's bitter and resentful about never being fully accepted by the Italian mob and how they look down on him for being Jewish. And yet he tries so hard to be a gangster. The heist was about making a statement, about striking back against the mobsters who've never really accepted him. Ultimately, Nino concocted this heist and refused to let the driver go due to his own arrogance and inferiority complex. Bernie then says,
The money always flows up, Izzy. You know that.
By calling Nino by his real name, or at least a name that may be closer to his real identity, it's as much an attempt to connect with him on a personal level as it is a power move. It's a subtle cutting moment, one that exposes Nino's entire facade as a wannabe Italian mobster. He's not the Italian mobster Nino, he's Bernie's Jewish partner in crime, Izzy. Bernie sees Nino's insecurities and he's done humoring them. Nino explains that their situation leaves them with no choice but to tie up loose ends and eliminate anyone who knows about the heist. Bernie is clearly incensed by this, but despite his clear disdain, Bernie reluctantly agrees that the driver and Shannon need to be eliminated. Then, in an almost casual gesture, he points out Cook sitting nearby, the other remaining loose end who also knows about the heist. Nino gives a small nod, a silent signal that Cook has to go too. Bernie doesn't hesitate. He grabs a fork and drives it into Cook's eye, then takes a kitchen knife and plunges it into his throat again and again. It's in this moment that Bernie's mask of civility completely slips and he reveals his true ruthlessness. Additionally, this moment is pretty ironic if you think about it. Cook is being killed with cutlery in a diner, a place meant for eating.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Nino caused this entire mess, and yet when it's time to do what needs to be done, he can't bring himself to do it. In fact, he can't even bring himself to look. Bernie acknowledges this and says,
Now it's your turn to clean up after me.
Which also implies that this isn't the first time Bernie's had to clean up Nino's problems. It's here that the film begins to draw a clear parallel between Bernie and the driver. Both men exist in a world of violence, both men are capable of unspeakable brutality, but the key difference? The driver's violence is emotional. It erupts in moments of passion, out of desperation, anger, or a need to protect. Bernie's violence, on the other hand, is calculated. He doesn't let emotions cloud his judgment, and that's why he's the perfect mirror for the driver. After the pizzeria scene, Bernie sneaks into the garage as Shannon is preparing to escape. He asks if Shannon is going anywhere, then grills him on the whereabouts of the driver. Shannon tries to play it cool and replies,
Mexico, or maybe it was Belize. Belize.
Have you given any thought to sending him on a trip to Belize?
Belize?
Yeah, Belize. Off on a trip to Belize.
Send him to Belize. I'll send you to Belize.
Really?
Of course, Bernie doesn't believe him. What makes this scene so powerful is how understated it is. There's no dramatic music, no over-the-top theatrics, just a simple conversation between two men who both know how this is going to end. Bernie then goes on to admit that he was genuinely excited about working with Shannon and sponsoring the driver's career as a race car driver. It's as if Bernie is lamenting the fact that things turned out this way, that in another world, in another life, Maybe they really could have built something. It's almost as if he's consoling Shannon. Then Bernie steps forward and shakes his hand. Earlier in the film, Shannon extended his hand to Bernie and Bernie left him hanging. Shannon wasn't worth the respect, but now Bernie's the one offering his hand. A handshake is usually a sign of mutual agreement, a closing of a deal. In Bernie's mind, this is as close to a courtesy as Shannon is going to get. A quiet moment of acknowledgement before the inevitable. And the inevitable comes quickly, with Bernie using a straight razor to cut open Shannon's forearm in one swift motion. As Shannon bleeds out, Bernie tries to comfort him. He stays with him, holding his hand, and softly tells him that it's over and that there's no pain. It's chilling how gentle Bernie is. Unlike his earlier murder of Cook, where he acted with malice, here he doesn't even look angry. It's a stark contrast that tells us a lot about Bernie's character. Despite everything, he actually liked Shannon. This gives weight to his earlier conversation with the driver when he spoke about Shannon overcharging him in the past, but still finding him likable. Bernie wasn't lying. If anything, this scene confirms it. But liking someone and sparing them are two different things. He's just trying to get out of a dangerous situation. It's simply the logical thing to do. After leaving Shannon's lifeless body behind, Bernie returns home and washes the razor like he's cleaning a kitchen knife after making dinner. It's a mundane, almost domestic action, an act of routine. But the placement of the razor is what's truly unsettling. He doesn't just tuck it away, he places it back in a display case alongside his other knives. This suggests Bernie has done this many times before, and he's kept the memory close. Even more importantly, he's keeping this personal tool of death within view in his home. In fact, it's very likely to be in a pride of place given how meticulous he is when placing the razor back in the case with his other knives. And here's where the parallel with the driver becomes undeniable. After the motel scene, we see the driver standing in the blood-soaked room. His breathing is heavy. He's tense. And despite his cold, violent efficiency, we see the weight of his actions creeping in. And what does Bernie do after killing Shannon? He inspects his hands. He stares at them, lost in thought. Despite how methodical he seemed during the kill, this tiny moment shows that it still weighs on him. He's not completely without conscience. There's a flicker of regret, of sadness. Clearly, his own violent actions has affected him. Once again, Bernie and the driver are two sides of the same coin. Both men are highly competent killers, both men kill when their backs are against the wall, and both men are emotionally and literally affected by their violent actions. After Bernie's execution of Shannon, the driver arrives at the garage to find Shannon's lifeless body slumped against the car. For most of the film, the driver has maintained an emotional distance from Shannon. They've worked together for years, but there's always been a sense of detachment, a lack of warmth, a lack of personal connection. But here, that mask finally slips. The driver is very upset. Shannon's death pushes him over the edge, and from here on out, his actions are no longer only about survival, they are also about vengeance. Wearing the stunt mask he used on the movie set earlier in the film, the driver stakes out Nino's pizzeria. Inside, Nino is enjoying himself at a party, laughing and chatting up a woman who doesn't seem all that impressed. The disparity in their expressions is hilarious, from Nino absolutely yucking it up to the lady's utterly tired and disappointed look. You almost get the impression that Nino blew hot air out of his ass and thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He eventually leaves and the driver follows him in silence. This slow and methodical pursuit shows how premeditated the driver is in committing the next act of violence. Much like in the opening heist scene, the driver is fully in control again. The driver eventually runs Nino off the road, and then T-bones his car off a cliff, sending it careening onto the beach below. Somehow Nino survives this, and manages to drag himself from the wreckage. The driver begins to walk towards him, prompting Nino to run away. Unfortunately, his only escape is the sea, which proves to be his undoing when the driver catches up to him and violently drowns him. The scene zooms out to the distance as Nino makes his final, desperate but futile struggle against the driver. This scene is fascinating in that it presents a stark contrast to Bernie's murder of Shannon. Bernie murdered Shannon with control, precision, and a strange sense of professionalism, and yet this was presented in a close, almost intimate way. The driver's murder of Nino, on the other hand, is primal and messy. And yet this scene was presented with such a strange sense of detachment as shown by the literal distance between the driver and the audience when he commits the drowning. It's almost as if the driver is now alienated even by the audience due to his violence. Immediately after drowning Nino, the driver makes a call.
You know the story about the scorpion and the frog?
This is the most significant line in the film. In just a few words, it encapsulates everything about the driver and Bernie in relation to the film's theme of violence. Violence is not only an action, it is also a nature. For those unfamiliar, the story of the scorpion and the frog goes something like this. In the tale, a scorpion asks a frog to carry him across a river. The frog hesitates, afraid that the scorpion will sting him. The scorpion promises not to, arguing that if he did, they would both drown. Convinced by the logic, the frog agrees. But midway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog anyway. As they begin to sink, the frog asks why. The scorpion replies, "I couldn't help it. It's in my nature." The moral of the fable is that some creatures, no matter their intentions, are doomed to act according to their nature, even if it destroys them. At first glance, it seems obvious that the driver is the scorpion. I mean, there's literally a scorpion in the back of his jacket that he wears throughout the film. The violence that consumes him is something he tries to suppress but ultimately cannot. The people who he cares for always get hurt despite his best efforts. The driver, like the scorpion, is doomed by his own nature. But then there's Bernie, who is just as much a scorpion as the driver is. Bernie doesn't want to kill Shannon, but when forced into a corner, Bernie kills quickly, efficiently, and decisively. His nature, like the driver's, cannot be escaped, and just as the driver's nature led to Irene being forced out of his life, Bernie's nature led to Nino's death. The people they both cared for got hurt because, like the scorpion, they couldn't help but sting each other. Going back to the phone call, Bernie correctly ascertains that there are only 3 people left who know about the money. Bernie, the driver, and Irene. And Bernie makes that explicitly clear. It's a thinly veiled threat, a reminder that Irene is still at risk. Bernie proposes a final deal to meet at a Chinese restaurant and talk things out. Before leaving, the driver makes one last phone call to Irene. This is the last interaction that he will ever have with Irene, and the fact that it happens via phone call shows the distance that is already growing between them in the direction of their lives. He then arrives at the restaurant. When they get to the car to get the money, like the scorpion, Bernie stabs the driver in the gut suddenly. The driver in return kills Bernie. Oddly enough, we don't see the actual moment of Bernie's death. Instead, we only see shadows cast onto the pavement, 2 dark figures staining the daylight, exposing the driver's and Bernie's true nature for all to see. Although, there is another interpretation of the shadows that may well be true. They may represent the fact that the driver's violent nature is slowly receding back into the darkness. The driver has finally ended the cycle of violence. Another thing to note is that this is the only violent scene in the film that isn't scored with silence or an ominous droning. Instead, a melancholic ethereal track plays throughout. In fact, it's a variation of the track that plays in the elevator when the driver kisses Irene. Not only does this add a sense of finality to the scene, but it also symbolizes how this is an act of love by the driver for Irene. He is doing this for her. After Bernie's death, the driver doesn't rush away. He simply sits in his car. Silent. Still. Contemplative. The world around him is blindingly bright. It almost looks like he's in heaven. The first time I saw this scene, I actually thought he had died. And In a way, he actually has. This final act of violence ensures that Irene and Benicio will be safe, but it also ensures that his connection to them has died and is gone forever. He cannot return to her. He cannot return to that life. He must leave for good. The driver starts the car, leaving Bernie's body and the stolen money behind. So what is the driver left with? Nothing. Nothing but a stab wound and the loss of the only meaningful relationships he's ever built. And really, that is the true cost of violence. Alienation. The driver, through his violence, isolates himself from any chance of human connection, despite how much he longs for it. While he protects those he cares for in the only way he knows how, it's the very methods he uses that ensures he will never keep what he wants. This is the last great duality of the driver. A man capable of tenderness, but incapable of having a life where tenderness can exist. This is why Drive has resonated with so many people, particularly disaffected young men. To them, the driver represents something romantic, a figure of stoic strength, masculine isolation, and noble sacrifice. But he also embodies a deep-seated fear that many feel. The fear of being unable to form meaningful connections because of something intrinsic, something wrong within them. Whether it's a perceived flaw, a personal failing, or a fundamental part of their nature. The idea that true connection is just out of reach is something that haunts a lot of people. And so they gravitate towards a figure like the driver, who suffers in a similar way to them, but also has the image of self-assurance. But for most people, the fear of isolation is just that, a fear. For the driver, it's his reality. Because unlike those who feel alienated but still have a chance to change, the driver is defined by his violence. And so these admirers miss the point entirely. The driver isn't someone to glorify, he's someone to be pitied. He couldn't leave the violence behind because of circumstances beyond his control, because of who he is, because of what's inside of him. He never wanted to hurt the people he loved, but like the scorpion, it was in his nature. And so he becomes a warning about the cost of violence. In a way, the driver does win, but it's not a victory worth celebrating. He keeps Irene and Benicio safe, and by removing himself from the picture, he ensures they will never be hurt by him again. But at what cost? The real tragedy of the driver isn't just that he's alone, it's that he always will be. He is a man who must sacrifice his happiness to ensure that no one else suffers because of him. A tragic hero who, in the end, proves his humanity through self-sacrifice. And that, combined with the recognition of what was lost through violence, that final act of sacrifice, that is what makes him We're just getting started.